Hello, my name is David Chandler. I am the narrator of Wayne Costy's presentation of his research on the evidence at the Pentagon. The series of videos we've produced presenting his work consists of 19 chapters plus an introduction. Each of the individual videos is between 10 and 30 minutes in length, but the total presentation is over 4 hours altogether. Because of the time commitment to watch the whole series, I am here presenting an overview with the key findings in a more accessible form. You can go to the individual chapter videos for more details and supporting materials. With that said, let's get started. The strongest evidence of insider involvement on 9/11, established by the 9/11 Truth Movement, is the proof that the buildings of the World Trade Center were demolished with pre-planted explosives. Constant quibbling about what hit the Pentagon makes the movement weaker. Because the Pentagon has been such a contentious issue for the 9/11 Truth Movement, the 9/11 Consensus Panel has urged the movement to take an agree-to-disagree attitude about it, quote, until there is an explanation that does justice to all the various types of evidence, unquote. We believe Wayne's research fulfills this criterion. If you care enough to have an opinion about what happened at the Pentagon, you should care enough to know what the evidence is and what it shows. Chapter 1 offers a brief overview. There are certain basics we should all be able to agree on. At the top of the list is the fact that nothing should have hit the Pentagon. The most productive discussion of the Pentagon events should begin there. The fact that the Pentagon was attacked without any kind of defense is a strong indication that the attack was allowed to happen, if not caused to happen, by governmental and military forces. The latter part of Chapter 1 is an overview of the structure of the Pentagon and the geography of its surroundings as they relate to the incident. It is important to have a grounding in this geography to understand the discussion that is to follow. Chapter 2 is entitled Endless Pentagon Debates: How Did We Get Here? There is a history of study and speculation starting very soon after 9/11 with Terry Masson's book, which established several memes that have characterized the debate ever since. Among these are the ideas that there was too little debris and that the hole at the Pentagon was too small. These themes are perpetuated on the Missing Wings website and later in the major videos Loose Change and In Plain Sight. Another error that entered the discussion and stayed is the misrepresentation of the structure of the Pentagon itself. The plane entered at the outer wall of the E-ring and produced a small exit hole in the inner wall of the C-ring. What is not recognized in much of the early work is there were no intervening walls. The first 2 floors of the Pentagon in this area were continuous open space, with only an array of columns for support. Similarly, in early videos, the walls are routinely described as being made of massive steel reinforced concrete. It turns out there is no steel reinforced concrete, except in the original 1941 era columns. Other errors in some of the early videos are mislabeling the floors, labeling the C-ring exit hole as the entrance hole, direct comparisons of this crash directly into a wall with other crash scenes where the plane hit the ground, and fragmentary out-of-context quotes from eyewitnesses. All of these errors lead to major misconceptions. Together with these kinds of careless observations are unsupported claims that any photograph that is inconvenient to one's hypothesis was photoshopped. While it is possible that some photographs have been altered, there are ways to cross-check the views from different angles to verify the reliability of an image. Wayne gives some examples and cautions against dismissing inconvenient evidence on flimsy grounds. Chapter 3 is a careful look at the size of the opening in the outer Pentagon wall. The idea that there was only a 10 to 20 foot opening in the Pentagon wall is widespread but totally erroneous. An early photograph of the Pentagon wall showed a small opening in the second floor with the first floor damage beneath it obscured by fire hose spray. This is probably the single most misleading early Pentagon theme that has persisted. No single photograph shows the entire 96-foot opening on the ground floor, but the opening can be documented section by section, and every column can be accounted for in individual photographs, and composite photographs allow visualization of the entire span of the opening. Column 9AA on the left is severely bowed and stripped of much of its concrete. There are no remaining columns from there to column 18 except for 3 columns severed at the bottom, pushed inward at the base, and hanging by rebar. Some have claimed the leaning columns were severed at the top and pushed out by an internal explosion, but the geometry of the attachment points and the fact that fire can be seen underneath these columns establishes the true situation. Column 9AA and the bent and twisted vertical steel window support tubing beside it are very important for understanding the way the left wing impacted the wall, so this will be discussed again later. One observation that Wayne discusses, which has not been discussed elsewhere, is a tree that was located near column 16. The shattered tree stump is clearly visible in the rubble and testifies to an impact event consistent with the right wing spar of the impacting plane. As we are going to see later, almost the entire plane, except for the outer part of the right wing, entered into the first floor. Wayne hypothesizes it was the tree that was sheared off by the plane and slammed into the second floor area that largely accounts for the 2 dislodged wall panels that created the notorious 16-foot hole. Chapter 4 goes into detail about the design, construction, and destruction of the outer Pentagon wall. It is commonplace to hear the walls described as being constructed of massive layers of limestone, brick, and concrete. There was a diagram that showed it this way. Documents show that the idea of supporting the brick and limestone walls with the reinforced concrete was actually rejected because of the number and size of the windows. Instead, the plan was to make the windows blast resistant. The 1.5-inch thick blast resistant glass was supported with steel frames that were connected to a grid of steel tubes that extended from floor to ceiling, connected with steel plates that ran along the corners of the floor and ceiling, and with the plates connected between the floors with long bolts. In addition, the exposed brick was covered with Kevlar to prevent shrapnel in the case of a blast. The threat that the walls were designed to prevent was an external blast, such as the truck bomb that destroyed the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, which killed 20 and injured hundreds more. Most of the injuries were due to flying glass. The fact that the reinforced section of the wall was constructed as described can be confirmed by photographs soon after construction and also by examining the rubble after the destruction of the wall. Chapter 5 focuses on the tree that stood in front of column 16. Aerial photographs show a large tree very close to the point of impact, and the shattered stump of the tree is visible in the rubble after the event. A significant observation about the tree is that the trunk and branches are displaced about 100 feet northward, leftward as you look at the Pentagon wall. Of all the theories of the destruction of the wall, only large plane impact can explain this northward movement of the tree trunk. The incoming plane impacted the wall with significant northward momentum. The tree would have been hit by the right wing spar between the fuselage and the right engine. The plane would slam the tree into the wall and push it northward, accounting for much of the second floor damage. To get to its northerly landing place along the base of the Pentagon wall, it would have to have ripped through the fuselage. This is what may have ripped some of the larger pieces of debris from the plane and distributed them to the north on the lawn. One piece is the section of fuselage with American Airlines lettering on it. Another piece is a section of overhead storage bins. Besides the trunk, there are branches mixed in with the rubble. Others have mistakenly identified the smaller branches as pieces of rebar, but with closer examination, their correct identification is clear. Additionally, there is a lot of tree litter distributed on the lawn close to the heliport. Since tree litter is an unexpected component of the lawn debris, its presence argues against theories that suggest the debris was planted. Chapter 6 looks in detail at the C-ring exit hole. The C-ring exit hole was caused by airplane debris impacting the inner C-ring wall. The hole was not caused by the nose of the plane or any other single large object, but rather a cascade of heavy plane parts. Previous researchers did not find any clear paths for debris to travel from the entrance hole to the exit hole. This is because the floor plans they used for their measurements exaggerated the size of the columns for purposes of color coding the damage. By using a diagram where the columns are shown to the correct scale, Wayne shows that there are 3 clear paths through the array of columns for significant amounts of debris to travel unobstructed from the entrance hole to the exit hole. Some of the debris is seen in the material that poured out the hole into the AE drive between the B and C rings, including wheels and landing gear that can be identified as consistent with a 757. The C-ring wall has been described as a reinforced concrete wall, but we can see from the edges of the hole that this description is not true. From direct visual inspection, we can see that the wall was just 2 layers of regular bricks with a layer of plaster and wire mesh. The hole is often described as perfectly round. This is not true. It is more or less rectangular with the outer layer of material knocked off by the impact, giving it a rounded appearance. A pipe is bent outward consistent with an impact event, and there's another pipe across the opening which argues against the hole being created by an explosive charge, as some have claimed. Chapter 7 deals with the approach path of the plane. The approach path is documented by several radar stations operating independently, also the Flight Data Recorder, or FDR, and the damage path and the testimony of many witnesses. The damage path from the notch in a tree on the overpass through the light poles, the entrance hole, and the C-ring exit hole lines up perfectly with the FDR and radar data. Any theory that asserts a different path, most notably the path north of the Citgo gas station advocated by the CIT group, requires that all of the damage inside and outside the Pentagon had to have been faked, and all the witnesses to the straight line path had to have been planted to support the false narrative. We conclude that the CIT approach path is not possible, and the few selected witnesses that testify to that path are mistaken for whatever reason. Wayne goes into more depth about the CIT witness interviews in a later chapter. Wayne continues with a detailed examination of each of the lamppost collisions. Lampposts 1 and 2 are of particular interest because one of these pieces impacted the windshield of Lloyd England's taxi, which is dramatic evidence that a plane really flew through the light poles in real time. The taxi incident is discussed in detail in a later chapter of the presentation. An objection that has been raised by pilots for 9/11 Truth is that the plane, which was in a dive, could not have pulled up after hitting the first lamppost to hit the Pentagon. They claimed that the pull-up would have involved extreme G-forces, over 10 Gs, which would not have been survivable by the plane. This claim has been shown to be erroneous several times before, but the claim remains on the Pilots for 9/11 Truth website. Wayne here repeats the calculation, shows where the error lies, and once again shows that the pull-up poses no problem. In conclusion, the data from the radar, the FDR, numerous eyewitness observations, and the damage path outside and inside the Pentagon all paint a consistent picture of a plane approaching the Pentagon on a low trajectory that impacts the Pentagon wall. In Chapter 8, Wayne presents a detailed analysis of the way a 757 could impact the Pentagon and produce the observed damage. After passing through the light poles, the remaining obstacles in the path of the plane were a chain-link fence, a large diesel generator trailer from the Pentagon refurbishment project, a low retaining wall, and several cable spools. The right engine impacted the generator trailer, leaving a major gash on its roof and rotating it toward the Pentagon. This would also have introduced some rotation of the plane, both horizontally in what's called yaw rotation, and some roll pushing the left wing downward. The left engine was stopped in its downward motion by impacting a low concrete retaining wall, preventing the left wing from hitting the ground. From there, the plane entered the building at the ground floor level, with the right wing impacting before the left wing. The right wing was tilted upward and crossed the second floor slab at about column 18. The floor slab was much more resistant than the column itself, so column 18 was not destroyed. Rather, it was severely damaged just below the second floor slab. held in place by the rebar in the column, but pushed inward and to the right. The inward deflection is indicative of a major impact event from the outside. The fact that the top of the column was pushed to the right is an indication that the column acted as a fulcrum as the outer portions of the right wing were dragged into the building. Column 19 was also smashed inward, exposing the rebar, just above the second floor slab, but not cut through. This shows that the end of the wing was stopped by the wall before being dragged into the building. Damage to the exterior face of the wall could not have been caused by internal explosions or the impact of a smaller plane or a missile. Columns 15, 16, and 17 are broken off at the bottom and left hanging by the rebar. Columns 15 and 17 are stripped of most of their concrete and are hardly recognizable as columns. Column 16 was also severed at the bottom, but less damaged, probably because it was shielded by the large tree that stood in front of it, which took the brunt of the impact. The left wing was essentially level and impacted entirely on the first floor level. All of the columns between 9AA and 15 were completely destroyed. Column 9AA was stripped and severely bowed, but not broken by the end of the left wing. Beside column 9AA was a vertical steel tube still in place that supported one of the new blast-resistant windows. The finger-like steel plates that extended from the support tube to the window frame were grabbed and twisted as the end of the left wing was dragged around it into the building. None of the other theories for what happened at the Pentagon can account for this twisting of this piece. The tail impacts the second floor slab and scars it near column 12. In this chapter of the presentation, Wayne walks through the entire impact from two different points of view in greater detail than this brief summary. Chapter 9 is a comprehensive review of the Lloyd England accident scene. Lloyd England's taxicab is important evidence that the downed light poles were a real-time event that could not have been staged ahead of time. Therefore, a large plane really did fly into the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11. There are several elements to this puzzle. First, according to Lloyd England, the taxi was moving about 40 miles per hour. When his windshield was hit and he applied his brakes, the typical calculation of stopping distance, including reaction time, would be about 164 feet. Since he stopped beside the debris of the first light pole, this would place his car at the time of impact near the second light pole, which was further to the north. So the idea that his car was hit by the 25 to 30 foot long base section of the first light pole, the one seen beside his car, must be completely erroneous. He had to have been hit by a part of the second light pole. Photography of the second light pole shows the vertical base section bent but not broken and lying on the downslope beside the highway. There were two arms reaching out to the light itself. One is seen still attached to the light, close to the original position of the second pole. The lower support arm, a piece about 11.5 feet long, is missing, however. This piece can be seen near the stopping point of the taxi. We must conclude that it is this piece that hit the taxi. Some of the objections were that the location of the car in the picture is not where it happened, that a 30-foot long, 200-pound pole could not have been pulled out of the car by two men, that the damage to the back seat was too light to have been caused by a 200-pound pole, and that such a pole could not have been extracted without damaging the hood of the car. All of these objections are answered once you recognize that the incident did not take place on the bridge where the car stopped, but rather about 164 feet further along the roadway, that the smaller pole could indeed have been removed by two men without damaging the hood, and that the lighter damage of the rear seat was consistent with the smaller pole. Furthermore, a sketch that Lloyd England made of the car with the pole sticking out is consistent with the 11.5-foot pole, but not a 30-foot pole. The bottom line is there is nothing about Lloyd England's testimony that should raise any suspicions. There is every reason to believe the light pole impact was a real event in real time. Chapter 10 looks at some video footage released from the security camera at the Citgo gas station just west of the Pentagon. The observation here is that a single frame of the security camera footage shows what may well be the shadow of the plane as it approached the Pentagon. The video takes patience and care to follow and understand, but if you play this video through, perhaps several times, stopping and repeating as necessary, you can see a definite pair of dark spots on the ground at the right time and place for it to be the shadow of the plane. Wayne argues that the two dark spots rather than one continuous spot is due to an intervening bush or small tree that is out of focus. Chapter 11 is a fresh look at the Pentagon security camera footage. The plane is made more visible by blinking the images with and without the plane so it can be distinguished from the cluttered background. The two cameras were set to record 1 frame per second and recorded their images sequentially onto the same recording device. The new Pearl Harbor video asserts without evidence that the time offset from one camera to the other was 1/30th of a second. Wayne, however, uses the motion of a truck seen after the impact to calculate the offset. He estimated the speed of the truck based on the distance traveled in 1 second, then estimates the distance traveled during the offset time between the two cameras. His measurements and calculations show that the time of offset was not 1/30th of a second, but instead 4/30ths of a second. With this knowledge and the distance of travel of the plane during the offset time between the two cameras, he was able to get an independent measurement of the speed of the plane, 542 miles per hour. This is consistent with other estimates of the speed in the range 530 to 560 miles per hour. The new Pearl Harbor video also makes the assertion that the videos from the two cameras are identical apart from the single frame in each camera containing the image of the plane, with the conclusion that the plane image was faked. This assertion was made based on comparison of the images of the fireball, but the fireball is slow moving compared to the 4/30ths of a second synchronization offset between the two videos, so it is not a reliable indicator. Wayne instead points to a number of small projectiles ejected by the explosion. These show significant movement from one camera view to the other, so this is again consistent with the authenticity of the videos. The segment ends by considering the videos released from the DoubleTree Hotel security camera. The video does not have a view of any possible impact, but it shows the space above the Pentagon and it shows the smoke cloud. One thing it does not show is any plane flying over the Pentagon. Chapter 12 is a detailed discussion of the nature and distribution of debris on the Pentagon lawn, inside the building, and what spilled out onto the AE drive through the C-ring exit hole. One of the causes of confusion and sense of mystery about the debris is from the fact that the plane did not hit the ground before impacting the Pentagon. Thus, the vast majority of the plane went directly into the building. Also, since the plane was traveling at an angle when it hit the wall, it had a major northward component of velocity. The debris that did come off outside the building was mostly thrown northward near the heliport. The heliport is very littered, while the lawn south of the impact point was largely free of debris. A factor in the distribution of lightweight debris is the traveling air mass in the wake of the plane. The plane was traveling over 500 miles per hour, and the turbulent air mass in its wake was traveling just as fast. When the plane impacted the building, the air mass rebounded and carried lightweight components northward and far from the wall. This included leaves and twigs from the impacted tree that could not have traveled through a stationary air mass for that distance. Theories that assert an explosion in the building rather than a plane impact cannot account for this distribution of debris. An explosion would have distributed the debris symmetrically in all directions. In the AE drive outside the C-ring exit hole, we can see a number of parts that can be clearly identified as belonging to a 757. This includes wheels and a landing gear. There is an engine component that some have pointed to as too small to be the engine of a large plane, but upon closer inspection it matches the rotor of a Rolls-Royce 757 engine. Investigators went through a significant process of collecting and identifying airplane parts and human remains from the crash, but this has been handled with secrecy and not released to the public. More transparency would help put the speculation to rest, but transparency is not a priority for the Pentagon. Chapter 13 looks at the question of evidence for internal explosions. This is a short chapter because there really isn't much evidence for internal explosions. There may have been some unseen explosions internally, but the damage that is visible from the outside could not have been caused by explosives. As we have documented, the damage shows every sign of being caused by a major impact event. The only real physical evidence for a possible explosion is an uplifted floor slab on the second floor. On the other hand, this is not definitive evidence. There was a large airplane breaking up underneath, and columns were being damaged and destroyed along the way. There was plenty of energy available from this process to uplift the slab. One piece of photographic evidence that is cited is a fireball captured by Darrell Donnelly at 9:42 and 40 seconds. We know the time because the same event was captured on two time-stamped live broadcast videos. What we know from the timestamp is this was an isolated event several minutes after the major impact damage, and there is no evidence of any damage caused by this event. The way the fireball erupted and then faded makes it look more like a gas explosion, possibly from a propane canister. The other event that is often casually attributed to explosives is the collapse of the Pentagon roof. However, the roof separated with a clean break along an expansion joint near column 11. The roof was already seen to be sagging at this point soon after impact. There was no loud explosive sound at the initiation of collapse. Eyewitness Bob Pugh says, "I heard a crunch and I looked back to my left and the Pentagon, actually the floors, were collapsing right across from where I was standing." Another eyewitness, Dave Statter, says this collapse just happened, it was not an explosion. That appears to be the case. Chapter 14 is about the April Gallop lawsuit. This is one of the highlighted areas where there has been a lot of dispute, and a lot of people have hardened their opinions based on what was said by April Gallop, or alleged to be said by April Gallop. The lawsuit was thrown out of court as frivolous and stands as a warning that we need to be very careful to focus our efforts on solid evidence. The lawsuit claimed that no plane hit the Pentagon, asserting that the damage was caused by a missile and/or other explosives. It was asserted that April Gallop walked out the impact hole in the Pentagon. No supporting evidence was presented. The room where April Gallop was located was room 1E517. But where that is located is not found in any of the literature we have seen. The Gallop legal team provided no supporting deposition or even suggested path of exit. The idea that she walked out of the impact hole is not at all believable, based on the fires seen in this area. In this chapter, Wayne presents large excerpts from testimony by April Gallop and others. It is clear from the testimony that she and others actually exited through a window, after which she lost consciousness and was taken to the hospital. One major criticism by the judge is the fact that April Gallop's story for the court was significantly changed compared to statements she had made in previous legal documents. The judge's decision reads in part, "Indeed, in attempting to marshal a series of unsubstantiated and inconsistent allegations in order to explain why American Airlines Flight 77 did not crash into the Pentagon, the complaint utterly fails to set forth a consistent, much less plausible theory for what actually happened that morning in Arlington, Virginia." Wayne Costy was actually present in the courtroom during the defense and says he was just floored by the lack of a coherent case. One of the face-saving details cited by some in the truth movement is that one of the judges in the appeals panel, Judge John Walker, was a cousin of George H.W. Bush, so they blamed the failure of the appeal on nepotism. However, it is apparent on objective grounds that the facts were simply not there to support the allegations. This is a wake-up call for the movement. Chapter 15 deals with some of the technical issues that have been raised concerning the incoming plane. The first is ground effect. This is a cushioning action of the air that occurs when a plane is landing. You may have experienced it as the gliding of the plane just before the wheels touch the ground. Some have asserted that the ground effect would prevent a plane approaching the Pentagon from flying so low. This is a fallacy, however. Ground effect can be canceled by adjusting the pitch of the plane, lowering the nose. Furthermore, the effect diminishes with increased speed, so a plane flying over 500 miles per hour would experience very little ground effect. The second effect discussed here is yaw rotation. That's the rotation about a vertical axis. When the right engine struck the generator trailer, there would be a torque on the plane that would tend to rotate it clockwise. The effect would be small because of the short time from generator impact to wall impact, but the rotation of the plane helps in interpreting some of the damage seen on the wall. Chapter 16 discusses a loud sound heard at 10, 10, and 3 seconds during a press conference held by Porter Goss on the Capitol Mall. Some have speculated that this was another explosion in the Pentagon, but comparing various videotapes, it is clear that this was a sonic boom. Chapter 17 takes a closer look at some of the citizen investigation team interviews. These interviews have been used to push claims that the plane seen coming into the Pentagon took a different route, flying north of the Citgo gas station rather than south of it, which is the path matching the radar, the FDR, the external and internal damage path, and the testimony of the majority of eyewitnesses. A consequence of the north path would be that the plane did not cause the damage, but flew over the Pentagon, hidden behind the cloud of smoke from a synchronized internal explosion, and that all the damage, both internal and external, were faked. The CIT findings were released as polished, edited videos with a soundtrack, but they leave many questions unanswered about the context of the interviews. CIT has not provided the unedited interview videos for inspection, despite repeated requests over the years. Turning to some of the individual interviews. George Ammann had a clear, unobstructed view across the parking lots. He saw the plane approach, he saw it impact the light poles, and he described the plane impacting the Pentagon. He was interviewed by the Center for Military History soon after the event. CIT then did their own interview years after the event and focused on a single small piece of the testimony. They ignored the fact that Mr. Ammann testified to light pole impacts and focused on the ambiguous statement that he saw the plane fly over the parking lot. Hitting the light poles is contrary to their north of Citgo flyover hypothesis, so Ammann is definitely a witness to a low-flying aircraft south of the Citgo station. By ignoring this clear testimony and focusing on his statement about the plane flying over the parking lot, they're misrepresenting his testimony to favor their hypothesis. Lloyd England, as we have discussed before, is a clear witness to the plane flying through the light poles, whether he saw the plane or not. CIT's approach to Mr. England is to attempt to discredit his testimony and portray him as a collaborator in staging the scene. This is based on the supposed claim that the 24-foot-long piece of the first light pole is what hit the windshield. The problem is Lloyd never points to the 24-foot pole and said, "That's the one." In fact, it is Craig Ranke of CIT who says that, putting words into Lloyd's mouth and looking for confirmation. Instead, he was met with silence. Chadwick Brooks was another witness to the impact of the plane into the light poles at the Pentagon. He was interviewed by the Library of Congress shortly after the event and by CIT years later. The details of the two interviews conflict in major ways. In both interviews, he says the plane flew into the Pentagon. Whether the differences are primarily due to differences in testimony or in editing is unclear. Sergeant William Legacy was a Pentagon police officer who could be considered CIT's star witness. He describes in some detail the path of the plane north of the Citgo station, but he also firmly asserts the plane hit the Pentagon. Other details in his earlier and later interviews raise issues of consistency in his testimony. CIT focuses only on the north path testimony. In this section, Wayne looks at details about Legacy's location in the Citgo station based on security camera footage, what would be blocking his view, and the evidence that he was actually facing south when the plane passed by, based on his own testimony. In later correspondence, Legacy says, "Rest assured it was a Boeing 757 that flew into the building that day. The fact that you're insinuating that this was staged and a fraud is unbelievable. You ask where the debris is. Well, it was in the building. I saw it everywhere. I swear to God, you people piss me off to no end." It seems clear which parts of his own testimony he considered most reliable. Robert Tercio was another witness at the Citgo station, interviewed about the same time as Lagasse and Brooks. Tercio unambiguously contradicts the location given by Lagasse to CIT. When pointing out his line of sight to the plane, he is facing south. The series of videos ends with some more detail on the question of flight dynamics and ground effect. There are other segments that may be added in the future, but for now it is hoped that this short summary will help you comprehend the scope of the research and present the main conclusions. Go to the full video series for more detail and supporting evidence on each of these points.